this is what I would recommend that you think about in every interaction that you have with the youth in your classrooms, making sure that students become more aware and accepting of their own emotions. I always like to start my presentations by sharing my positionality and the reason why I do the work that I do. I am an immigrant myself. I came to the US at age 14 as a freshman in high school and got to experience firsthand many of the new issues, as a youth that I needed to learn to cope with, and many of my peers had to cope with. And due to that experience and just seeing what happened, and I know we have limited time, so I'm not going to share the whole story, but just seeing how impacted myself and my peers were from that experience as a newcomer ELLs, I got motivated to focus my work and my research in trying to give back to the community, and most importantly, trying to promote resiliency or social emotional resiliency among this population, because I had interacted with this youth. I had lunch with them for years and got to see how much of a resilient group they were, how much do they bring to the table, and how much talent is really gets wasted by not providing the supports that they need to be successful in our schools. I think that most of you, and I'm going to go very quickly through these slides that kind of give us give us more of a picture of why is it that we need to focus on the mental health of immigrant students in the U.S. Of course, we know that we've seen it, everyone, and I was looking at as people were introducing themselves in the chat. I was seeing most of you are teachers of ELL students, so I'm pretty sure that you get to see it on a daily basis. Students just struggling because they're learning a new language. They feel ashamed. They're struggling because they miss their families. They feel that they don't have necessarily a support system, or they're developing a new identity, ethnic identity, or they're experiencing or having to cope with discrimination, acculturated stress, and many, with also the low sense of belonging in their communities and belonging in their schools. Research, and I started doing this research in the early 2000s when I started graduate school. And there, my colleague, Cristian Blanco Vega, and I had conducted a systematic review to see, what are the protective and risk factors of immigrant adolescents, and especially the adolescent group, because we also know that younger kids might have different needs, but most of my work has focused on middle schoolers and high schoolers. But we got to see that they definitely report feeling pretty down based for everything that they get to experience as immigrants. Most recent research has shown that what we saw, almost 15 years ago in the literature is still consistent. The students that are still reporting high levels of trauma, depression, anxiety, and feeling that they don't necessarily have the support that they need to be successful. So here is just the list of risk and protective factors. Of course, the list of risk factors seems longer than what the protective factors that have been identified by the literature. But I want to point out that resiliency is one of the main protective factors. I think that as a field, in education and in psychology, in my case as a school psychologist, we have had a long history of focusing on the deficits, right? And not necessarily focusing on the positives. But I think it's very important for us to remember that immigrants, have experienced a lot, before even leaving their countries of origin, but they have engaged in a lot of problem solving, and a lot of they have demonstrated over and over again how resilient of a community and individuals they are. So it is important for us not to forget about that. It is important for us to think about what have they been through, how much they've been able to bounce back, and how can we contribute as their educators, as their mental health care providers, to promote that resiliency now in their new settings. So this is one of the focuses. So since the early 2000s, or mid 2000s, I started working on a project or a research lab that I call Project Fuertes, which stands for Facilitating Universal Emotional Resilience for the Social and Academic Success of Latino ELLs. This is the model that we kind of have followed in that research lab, in understanding, this is the ecological model by Bronfenbrenner, but we adapted it to give us the message that when we're working with youth, especially immigrant youth who have experienced many issues at the microsystem level, meso and exosystem, that we are sure not to just provide interventions, one-on-one interventions with them, and ignore everything else in all the other systems that are contributing to their development. So it is very important, for me, it was very important to ensure that the programs that we developed, the programs that we validated with this population, that they had a multi-system approach, so that these children can feel supported by different levels, so that they can be have a better chance at promoting those resiliency skills. A model that we had developed with my colleagues and I, we finally got published in 2008, but we developed it early in 2004, 2005, where we saw that, yes, the literature is saying that all these bad things, all these social cultural factors are against or immigrant youth for being able to be resilient. Most of them kind of lead to negative or maladaptive behaviors. But based on what we were looking at and how we were looking at where we could provide supports within the schools or community systems, we really felt that the zone of intervention for the youth, or where we could really make an influence or the malleable factors, was in trying to come up with programs that will help the youth reduce their sense of acculturated stress and increase the sense of the belonging in their communities. And for those of you who might not be aware, might have not heard of the term acculturated stress in the past, acculturated stress is the stress an individual who's in between two cultures experiences when they're feeling that they have to adapt to the new culture in order to, I go beyond in my definition, but in order to avoid discrimination. But by doing that, by adapting to the new culture, they're also feeling the tension of their home culture for living, for not necessarily maintaining their cultural values or beliefs. So again, when looking at how can we promote resiliency, given that they have a lot of risk factors and the protective factors and the areas of intervention, or where we can actually do something to support them, is limited. I definitely think that we have an opportunity to do those, to promote resiliency in each of the different levels that we have, especially in the school systems. I have to say that that is one of the reasons why I became a school psychologist, because I really felt that in the schools we have captive audience, especially immigrant populations. They are likely to come from cultures where mental health is a big taboo. Trying to go and get mental health supports, it might not necessarily be something that everyone is open for. So doing this systematically in a school setting where they have to be there is the best way to prevent further problems and promote that resiliency that we want them to remember that they have. So through my research, as I mentioned, I started this work in 2002, and probably even before, if I'm honest with you, since I started working as a high school student. Very quickly, I became a student advocate for myself and my peers. And I still remember setting up some motivational, that's how we used to call them, motivational conferences. We had a great school counselor who supported us in bringing role models to our school and trying to get us to do something to support my peers. So this is a long journey, since I became since I became an immigrant in the U.S. So here I show you some of the some of the work that we've been doing, and for those of you that are working directly in the classrooms with the youth, this is what I would recommend that you think about in every interaction that you have with the youth in your classrooms. So first, making sure that students become more aware and accepting of their own emotions. Also help the students recognize thinking errors. This is going to make a little more sense in the next slide, where I also propose and promote that we teach students systematically the social emotional learning skills that will allow them to identify, like, yes, I'm actually making a thinking error, and help students to reframe. This is something that students can learn, from a social emotional learning program, or someone coming in and explicitly teaching it to them. But it's always best when we are able to provide them with the opportunity to reinforce what they have learned, and when we see them engage in those behaviors as a teacher, that we can kind of tell, hey, I think you're making a thinking error right now. You're probably thinking just dark glasses is one of the examples that I can provide. And let's see how we can reframe this. So those type of one-on-one interactions will make a huge impact and huge difference on the youth. We have, through our research, been able to see that when teachers are the teachers who report that they not only teach the program to the youth at the classroom wide, but also engage in reminders throughout the week about this, and in these interactions actually have better outcomes for the students. So it's very important to engage in this when you are working with the youth. I think it's also very important to normalize for the youth acculturative stress and acculturation gaps, and of course promoting tolerance. Keep in mind that for immigrant youth, this is the first time that they have found themselves to be maybe an ethnic minority, or that they had to navigate different cultures. Of course, there's exceptions to that. There might be some students who might come from communities where they have been marginalized already in their countries of origin. But for those communities, they're also experiencing acculturative stress over again, mainly because, and it probably even magnified, because they were dreaming that in the US things were going to be different, and they're probably experiencing even more discrimination and more tension within their communities. Also, it's very important that we work closely with the parents to help them cope with the acculturation gaps. We tend to forget that the parents are also, if the child is an immigrant, it's extremely likely that the parents are also going to be immigrants, and new immigrants who also don't know how to raise a child who's navigating two different cultures. So how can we as teachers help the parents learn to cope with those acculturation gaps and see that it's not their child, but it's a situation, and how can we get them to open those channels of communication, even though they might be acculturating at different rates. So that is going to be very important. And of course, it's going to be important for us to be aware of symptoms related to mental health problems that are going to really require for us not to try to be the therapist for your students, but when a student really, you can see that they need additional and more specialized support, that we refer them for culturally responsive mental health care providers. And that is hard. I have worked with many, many teachers of in immigrant students, and our heart tends to be, and I say, even though I have not been a classroom teacher per se, but whenever I go into classrooms, our heart is just wanting to open up and adopt. I remember even one of my own teachers wanting to adopt me when I was in high school and going through some of these situations. And every teacher I have worked with since then kind of shares that experience. But it's very important for us to know when our students are going to be better off by us referring them to a professional. Also, I think it's very important for us to advocate and to teach other educators about the challenges that immigrants are facing, and help us increase tolerance in the settings that we're in. Now, with the classrooms, the supports in the classrooms, this is the list of the lessons of the cultural adaptation I made to the Strong Teens program, which is a validated evidence-based social emotional learning program. It's a 12-week lesson. I know I won't have enough time to go through all of the lessons, but as you can see, we teach them about self-awareness, dealing with anger, or social awareness. And here's the part of clear thinking when we teach them about identifying their thoughts, faulty thoughts, and then also reframing them, the power of staying optimistic even when the adversity is real, which for many of our youth, that is the situation, solving people's problems, letting go of stress and goal setting. Here I highlight, the skills that we teach in each of these lessons. And in this column, you can see the adaptation that we made to ensure that the youth feel that they have been their needs as immigrants and individuals who are experiencing a lot of immigration related stress. And that can also mean like they're learning a new language and it's probably not going as fast as they thought that it would be. I remember myself as an immigrant thinking that I would be fluent in English 6 months after I arrived. I sometimes feel I'm not even fluent yet, but and it's been it's been almost 30 years. So definitely it is it's a process and helping the individuals use the skills that they learn in our lessons to cope with their cultural reality, to cope with the discrimination that they might be experiencing, the acculturation gaps that they might be experiencing at home, and so forth. So this is an explicit a program where we explicitly teach, the way that you would teach math, the way that you would teach social studies. We explicitly teach them the skills and we explicitly give them examples of how they can apply these skills to their life as immigrants. And this program, and I have it in my reference list, we have multiple studies that have showed that it is a effective program at improving resiliency and decreasing internalizing or depression, signs of depression and anxiety. This is one of the handouts that we have of the program that kind of show you how this is the most valuable lessons. I mean, everything is good, but the most valuable lessons to me are the lessons where we teach the children to identify, things as but binocular vision, which is very common. I'm not sure how many of the teachers in the audience can attest that many of the youth will say, I will never learn English. I could never go to college because I will never learn English well enough. They're really making oh no, that's the fortune telling. Sorry, I know that I only have a minute left, so I'm starting to rush too much. But fortune telling, what they're making predictions about the future without enough evidence. And it happens so frequently. And it is very important for us teachers to kind of tell them like, wait, what evidence do you have to really be thinking about it in that way? Let's think about ways we can reframe, or let's think about other possibilities that we can bring up, to support, to make sure that you overcome this adverse situation. This is just one example. We don't have enough time. In Project Fuertes, again, facilitating universal emotional resilience for the social and academic success of ELLs. We also have a parent component. As I mentioned, right, we want to be ecological or an ecological approach where we're not just targeting the individual at the classroom level, but also the parents. And here you can see where we explicitly teach the parents how to promote those social emotional learning skills, but also teach them and have a discussion about how the U.S. school systems might be different than the one from their home countries, how they can navigate those multiple cultures or navigating, the cultural challenges that they might be having, and how they can stay involved with their kids even if they feel that the system is completely unfamiliar to them. And we have had also great data to support, the effects of that program. System-wide, I also think, and I have less than a minute, but system-wide supports, I think is very important to try to get just the same way we'll do multiple multi-tiered levels of support for for behavior or other social emotional issues or even reading in schools, it should be viewed as a priority to try to have system-wide supports for our immigrant youth. That will require securing that administrator support, creating, strong multidisciplinary team that can help us with immigrant students in particular. I think it's going to be very, very important that we identify community resources, because remember, they're new to our communities, and having those community resources is going to be essential for them to be able to navigate and be successful and feel that they belong in our systems. Also, when we can screen for those mental health needs, you will be amazed of how many, because immigrant youth are very resilient, so they can really fall through the cracks, because we see them as being good behaving kids, or they can seem like they are, they have a lot coping with, but they're bouncing back, but they might still need support. So it's going to be important for us to systematically screen those needs, teach, the SEL vocabulary and competencies, promote the mental health literacy in the youth or parents, so that we can open, just them being more open about seeking services when needed, and of course, learn what are the common signs and behaviors related to mental health challenges, even among, just resilient kids. Remind the kids of that they are resilient, that they have overcome a lot in their short lives, and that they are gaining additional skills through social emotional learning to be able to be even more resilient and achieve the dreams. And of course, we want to remind every adult in our ecological systems that every child really deserves to dream, and also a future, especially with the dreams and the futures that they had for a better life. Uh, in the reason why they came to the US, right? Everyone comes to the US kind of like the monarch butterfly, because we believe that here we can have the resources to develop and have a more safe and better life.